So now you have, I don't know which organizations, talking about putting balls in space to reduce sunlight, to try to combat global warming. Well, you know what? The Tonga eruption beat you to it. We don't need your services, thanks very much. I'll take my money back from your carbon taxes and you owe me interest on that too. If they want to play God and try to block the atmosphere, our planet has done it already to the point that it is going to put food production in jeopardy for the human race as we move through this. Not everybody's going to have access to food by the end of the year. And thank you for staying with me here to talk more about volcanic winter in the Southern Hemisphere. Not being talked about at all across the wider media, but over the last 2 days, there's been a tidal wave of information saying that this volcanic eruption from Tonga, Hunga Ha'apai, is actually going to warm the planet. Now this would be the first time in human history that a VEI 6, borderline VEI 7, which is Volcanic Explosivity Index, would have warmed the planet. So go back anywhere from now to the last 80,000 years when Homo sapiens sapien has been here. This would be the only recorded instance ever that a volcanic eruption at that magnitude would heat a planet. I don't know why all of this heating information is coming out about what this volcanic ash is doing, but at least they're acknowledging it. So that gives us a chance to put out some scientific information here. I like charts, I like graphs, images. So this is the eruptive cloud that we saw, and I'm going to tie this together into what happened in Pinatubo, how much it cooled Earth's climate, compared to one-to-one what happened in Tonga, and then look at the countries that are major bread baskets and exporters to the rest of the world with grains, with wheat and corn. We're going to look at the declines from there, and with the Northern Hemisphere having all these problems, you know, from the war with Russia and the droughts and the jet streams are out of their flows and cloud cells are bunching on. Our stable planting and harvesting dates are not there any longer, and we're losing a significant portion of global grain production this year in the Northern Hemisphere. So as we look through it, look at the cloud tops here, 55 kilometers. And you're going to have to divide this, which is a gray hair to split. I know it is. But when you're looking at the entire disk there, what they call it, there's different heights that the ash had reached. The entire disk itself, 30 kilometers up or so, and that would spread. But the center column, which you're looking at the ash density in this graphic, was already pushing at 30 kilometers. Now I know we're in the States here, so if you multiply 0.6, you're going to come up with the number of miles on that. So 10 miles is 16 kilometers. 20 miles is 32 kilometers. So we're getting up and far past the upper reaches in the atmosphere of what you consider the stratosphere. And here's the most important thing to look into is at the apex and at the very top heights that were measured, we're talking about 87 kilometers high.
The hype about collagen is real. Over 1,100 people participated in a study that demonstrated collagen supplements are some of the best ways to improve the quality and health of your skin. The study found that taking collagen for 90 days is effective in reducing the appearance of skin aging. Collagen does this by improving skin elasticity and hydration. And it's also one of the most effective ways to strengthen joints, bones, and ligaments, along with helping hair and nail growth. 5 key types of collagen you need from 4 different sources. And you also get a free e-report titled The 14 Foods for Amazing Skin that help slow down the effects of aging. And take up to 51% off your order by going to healthwithadap2030.com. Free shipping, 60-day money-back guarantee. That link's in the description box below. And now on with the video.
So 160 kilometers would be 100 miles. How far does it go? And in comparison with Mount Pinatubo, now this was the biggest eruption along with El Chinchon. So looking back in 1991, there's a lot of good data about how high the ash cloud went, how much it cooled the planet over the successive years. And just the simplest of the graphic is looking at the ash plume coming out, and they try to measure that into the stratosphere. And I put the mile to kilometer equivalent at the bottom. 12 miles is 20 kilometers. So Pinatubo, which cooled our planet, only went up 20 kilometers. Now the aerosol optic depth, this is a word that you'll start to hear in the media more and more. It's just talking about how much sulfur dioxide and ash is blocking sunlight from striking onto a plant's leaf surface to cause photosynthesis, to make that thing grow to come to head either on an ear or on a berry, a grain of wheat. So got to keep the numbers in mind, 20 kilometers, and some of the numbers here backed up that have run through all the temperature stations. El Chinchon, even though it was back in the 70s as well, late 70s, early 80s, you can see the temperature drop. And then Pinatubo was a step down from that. So when we're going to try to do the equations here, El Chinchon is pretty close. But Mount Pinatubo, dropping Earth's temperature 0.7 of a degree. That should have been talked about after the ash had reached a certain level on what we were going to do to protect agriculture in the Southern Hemisphere, or have the farm inputs slightly changed, because the nutrient requirements for a low-level situation in plants to come to maturity, A, it's going to take longer, and B, they're going to uptake more nutrients because they're deficient. Think about your body. If you went through a time with little food, your body would behave differently. You might get sick easier, you get more tired more easily, you might make bad decisions, cognitively not there, just feel like you're over in some direction, not centered any longer. Well, plants go through the same phases. So just at this bare minimum of information, just comparing ash cloud top heights and cooling, it's a travesty that this is not on our front page media. And when you try to bring things like this out, run through the muck, if you will. Now the yellow is what you're looking at in the center on the top left. This is way up into the mesosphere, above 55 kilometers. It pegged the chart on all the information they could ever possibly gain on. They never even thought it would ever go this high. That they didn't put a 65 or a 75 kilometer band in there to measure, because going back in history, when we look at these tall volcanic eruptions, we haven't had anything going into 180,000 feet before. So they didn't program it in their models to catch it when they were getting real-time readings from it. And then if you look at the bottom there, almost that entire ash plume was at least at 35 kilometers. Now the most important thing, where the rubber meets the road on this information, okay, we had a giant eruption, bigger than one that we know cooled the planet. So we're going to delve into where is this going to affect first. It already is affecting with the record cold temperatures and record snowfall, precipitation in these latitudes. So we're going to be in the Southern Hemisphere on this, not the Northern Hemisphere. We're looking at 20 degrees south latitude to approximately 40 degrees south latitude, because Tonga was right around 20 degrees. And if you're thinking about the cloud cells the way they're looping, they're going to pull from 20 to 30, and then from 30 to 60 there'll be another cloud cell that'll keep pulling that down into Antarctica. We have the same cloud cells in the Northern Hemisphere. Hadley cell would be a one that you might remember from a textbook somewhere. It's just the way they pull our atmosphere from the equator toward each pole, and that's what gives us a lot of our movement in the skies, if you will. This is how clouds transit around. Now, we have to look at these countries that are in the same area that are major grain producers. Looking down there, we see Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay off the South American continent, and then we get down into Zimbabwe and parts of South Africa coming on. South Africa is a major grain producer and a major exporter to the rest of Africa north. And with Egypt being cut off from the Ukrainian deliveries, and then also diminished yields coming out of South Africa, Egypt will be another flashpoint, especially those that import heavily. So moving over to Australia, another major grain exporter that's having difficulties this year, struggling a little bit. So you have this basket of information, then how can you verify it or back it up if there is some change taking place? Well, I would look at the volcanic aerosols and see truly how much of that stuff is in the air. And we're talking about water vapor because it blew out of the ocean. You have the ash itself and different types of ash and rock and mineral constituent that have been, I wouldn't say nanoparticleized, but close. So they're still up there. It'll take several years for that to come down. And then the ash and the sulfur dioxide. So this is all of what is in when they measure this optical depth. It's like how much interference is coming from the sky to the ground in terms of stuff floating in the air, basically, for a better term of it, but you can classify it as those three things. Now, where it gets yellow, that's the densest. Hardly anything coming through there. Very diffused sunlight reaching the planet's surface. And again, you just look right there. Where's the heaviest concentration of ash, sulfur dioxide, water vapor hanging over in latitude bands in the Southern Hemisphere? 20 to 30. And the other colors there, the orange and the red, are quite intense also. So when you look at this, you say, whoa, 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 the entire Southern Hemisphere is being blocked by some sort of ash there. Now, how much will it really affect the yields off the plants? We have to look back into the 1990s and the 1970s for bigger eruptions to be able to figure that one out. But clear as day, and on the very bottom there, it's starting to really run away here in these last few months. Since April, there's been a huge uptick. It's thinning more, so now it's starting to cover more wide area. So here's the answer. What comes out of there? What comes out of these areas that are being affected by the ash right now and will be over the next year, solid, and into 2024? So corn exports. What else is there? Wheat. These are the huge grain baskets of the southern part of our planet, in danger of not producing. And then if you know already, there's herbicide shortages, fertilizer shortages, and pesticide shortages that have been running through the supply chains and farming in general this planting season in the Northern Hemisphere. Now we need to add in the wars, resource nationalism, and then a third or fourth or fifth factor, however you want to dissect that out, that volcanic ash is going to interfere with crop production across the Southern Hemisphere. Main crops, corn and wheat affected. Soybean, they have a broader leaf, wider leaf. They're able to grow with less sunlight and be affected. But corn, massively affected. So I know people are asking, well, how much ash is really up there? And let's take a look. And another surprising thing for me. This is one of the largest eruptions in human history that we have recorded, but they only have a few pictures of the ash from the International Space Station, although it loops through there about once every hour and a half. Being a fan of this and following this type of information, I'm sitting here looking for it every day, and I was even following the ISS live feeds, but whenever they would get remotely close, it would cut and they would go to a looped segment. So, largest eruption, and we only have 10 photos, so I'm going to run through the ones that I think show the best situation update. So the ash emissions are scraping the International Space Station almost. They could reach out there and grab that with their hand like you would outside of a boat going through a pond. That's how high and how vast it was after day 1, 2, and 3. And for some reason, they never talked about crop losses and what we're going to go into, because food has been used as a weapon since time immemorial. Now for me, this just says elite central banking, whatever you want to term that as, is riding on top of this natural cycle to create more tight food distribution and access to food to eventually come in December and introduce digital rationing cards for food, because at that point the prices will have run away. It's going to be lean coming into this harvest season. There's talk of the Chicago Board of Trade calling force majeure on corn deliveries. If that were to happen, then New York Stock Exchange needs to stop immediately trading any exchange-traded funds that are on the grain side. But everything that's derivative spent out of that and the bonds even issued on top of that all need to cease at the same time. So it's not about not being able to get corn onto a barge on the Mississippi River somewhere. It's about that force majeure locks up the rest of the financial system. And then the buyers are going directly to the grain silos or to the grain distributors to buy direct with no price discovery in the middle where you sit on the CME or the CBOT right now. food is going to be the thing that will be around every dinner table coming in through the holidays to talk about. So I'll pull you back over here to the Mount Pinatubo eruption. On the top there, you can see it created such a layer that it had a double aerosol layer. Now this started to separate out where you had the finer particulates higher up and then a little bit more denser medium further down, but still light enough to be and remain higher in the atmosphere, airborne like that. Now if you step below, this is where we get to the same exact thing, but at a much higher level in the atmosphere. So now you have, I don't know which organizations, talking about putting balls in space to reduce sunlight, to try to combat global warming. Well, you know what? The Tonga eruption beat you to it. We don't need your services, thanks very much. I'll take my money back from your carbon taxes and you owe me interest on that too. If they want to play God and try to block the atmosphere, our planet has done it already to the point that it is going to put food production in jeopardy for the human race as we move through this. Not everybody's going to have access to food by the end of the year. Just what has happened with farming inputs, the shortages, they struggled to get planting in this year to get the fertilizers on their crops. And now we're in the crop maturation phase where we need to protect the plants, but there's a herbicide shortage and a fungicide shortage and an insecticide shortage. So now there's all these other plants growing in the rows with your target species. So what's in the corn rows? You can't protect it from insects because there's no insecticide, so everything is getting nibbled. You can't get a premium price for that. Now, I'm not a fan of big ag the way it's done, so don't go that way. It is the way it's done now. And until we transit, and it's going to take a bit to turn that ship. Until that happens, we're going to keep going the same direction to produce food on the planet with large agribiz until enough people switch over. But that's the way it's done now, and these are some massive changes that. So if you're going to be looking for signs of volcanic ash affecting crop production, you're going to start to look for what they call volcanic twilight. And see, here's the scary thing, is these volcanic twilights are being sighted at 40 degrees south and way down to Antarctica, which means it's gone from 20 all the way down to 90 south, as far as you can go to the bottom of the planet. So it's not exclusively locked in that 20 to 40 degrees south latitude band. It has transited all the way. It covers the entire Southern Hemisphere. Now there's going to be some transition over the equator into the Northern Hemisphere too, so you just have to wonder when that effect is going to start to kick in and when we might see different types of temperatures. So here's the largest wheat producing countries, and I want to focus strictly on Southern Hemisphere on this. So if I look down the top 10, Argentina, Australia, and then we know Ukraine is having a difficult time at the moment. Little, if any, is coming out of there this year. Russia might not hit their targets. The U.S. is in a drought. Kansas, out west, 1 out of every 10 farms is going to claim 0 and take the prevent plant this year. And going over to what's considered good production in the east part of Kansas, average would be 60 bushels per acre. They're down around 20 to 25. And this is happening everywhere across the Northern Hemisphere. So these grain yields are going to be incredibly low. So a lot of traders and those that are buying massive amounts of grain are looking in the Southern Hemisphere saying, we need it, Savior, save us. And it's just not going to be there. So then what's going to happen to the rest of the world once they realize this? When that goes into the mind that this is going to be a massive shortage for the next 2 years as we try to get supply chains up and fertilizers back in, diesel fuels to the farmers, get our farm inputs so we can actually grow crops and deliver them to market. There's not a Manhattan Project to get farm inputs back up, so as I see this, it's just going to continue to decline at some point. That was wheat. This is corn. And if we look at the top chart, easy to read, Argentina, Brazil, major exporters of corn. Oh, and Ukraine. Those three are going to drop off a cliff, and they are, and they have. Ukraine is not going to export very much this year. I would be surprised if they reach 1 million tons of export. Even when they planted the fields, they only went up to 20% of the entire field space of Ukraine was planted this year, 20%. So you can imagine the yield declines when they couldn't get out there, experiencing the same shortages, but in a war setting of no farm inputs to protect your crops. And the ports are mined. There's not going to be much coming out of there. So this hopeful thing, like what was that, the junk shot when they were trying to stop the BP oil spill. Oh, it's one of those things. Think of it as a junk shot is what they're trying to sell you here, but for ag instead of oil spill. Flip that one. But the fertilizer prices too, they're not going to come down. And this is my whole point is, why is there not a concerted effort globally amongst all governments to rush and put people back to work and industries back to work and streamline that process of getting those farm inputs to every farmer that needs it to grow our food again? We're looking at a 25 to 30% decline globally in all crop production this year compared to last year. The markets are, well, they're going to go to record pricing yet again. Now, to talk about the base commodity at the base food stuff level, that's one thing. But what's corn? What's corn used for? Everything. So if the corn yields are down, you're 30% down on the corn globally, then look at all the other byproducts that come from it. You got the emulsifiers. You have the binding agents, the corn starches, and everybody's non-favorite poison, high fructose corn syrup. A lot of industries are going to shut down if they don't get the cornmeal, the corn flour, the corn product, whatever it is. I had a couple conversations with those who are in the process of buying for factories, and if they can't get the products, they're simply going to shut down, laying more workers off because they can't retool the flavor profiles and the tastes, and there's a lot of things in that one particular product that made you a buyer of it. If they start moving around the ingredient list and flavors, you're just simply not going to buy, and they understand that too. They don't want to lose the customer base, so they're just going to shut it down, and that's why we're starting to see store shelves dwindling. Every time you go in, there's less and less and less, and the prices are higher and higher and higher. So let's talk about Ukraine for a second, and really overall, what does this mean for the rest of the planet? How high can our food prices go? Based on historical precedent, I have a couple charts here to right after the break to show you, going back to, say, 1270 AD, bringing you through the 1600s to show different episodes of food price rises when mass wipeout of crops came across our planet several centuries ago. So the best crystal ball would be to look back in the past and see where we sit and where we might move to. But to Ukraine, 29% of global exports for corn. You got to slash that off right there. So everybody's going to be vying for the same amount of available corn out of an ever-shrinking pie. At what point do buyers say, you know what, I'll give you 50% over market bid and I'll buy everything you got. I'll give you 1.5 times pricing, and then the next person goes, no, I'll give you 2. I'll give you double the price. You got the physical? That's why everybody in Chicago is running with their contracts going, give me the physical, because they can on-sell it about a minute later after contract close in September, and then the valuable product is going to be incredibly valuable, way more than the cash. Cash, nothing. You want the product in hand. So let's talk about that after the break. David Dubine with Brighteon TV.